While I was having dinner at my son's house, my neighbor called me with a trembling voice. "Are you home?" he asked. "No," I replied. "Then who is in your house right now?" he whispered. When I tried to leave my son's house to check on my own place, my son stopped me and laughed loudly. You wouldn't believe what he was hiding. The door suddenly slammed against the kitchen wall with a crack that made me drop my coffee mug. Gary burst through without knocking, his leather jacket scraping against the doorframe as he stumbled forward. His bloodshot eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal, and his trembling hands fumbled with the zipper of that worn jacket he'd owned for years. "Dad, I need money," he blurted out before catching his breath. 25,000. Tonight. I set my half-empty mug beside the scattered mail on the kitchen table, keeping my weathered hands steady despite the shock. The evening light streamed through the window, casting long shadows across his disheveled face. His shirt was wrinkled and untucked, and dark circles sagged beneath his eyes. 25,000, I repeated, crossing my arms and feeling the familiar weight of disappointment settle in my stomach. "What kind of trouble are you in now, son?" Gary began pacing, his boots clicking against the hardwood floor in a frantic rhythm. He couldn't sit still, couldn't even look me in the eye. His fist cracked against the table, making the salt shaker jump. "It's complicated. Some business deal went wrong. I need to make it right. Fast." "Business deal," I said evenly, though my jaw tightened. "Or gambling debt." His face flushed red and he spun to face me, blocking the kitchen entrance with his broad shoulders. "It's none of your business what it is. I just need the money, and I know you have it from selling the farm." The farm. 3 generations of Porter sweat and sacrifice. Sold last year to pay for my retirement. The money was supposed to last me through the years I had left, not disappear into some casino's coffers because my 38-year-old son couldn't control himself. "Gary," I said, stepping closer and noting how his hands shook when he thought I wasn't looking. "How much do you owe them?" "Them." His voice cracked. "The people who have you this scared. The ones who sent you here at night, looking like you haven't slept in a week." He ran his fingers through his greasy hair, leaving it sticking up at odd angles. "Dad, please. You don't understand. These aren't the kind of people who wait for payment plans." I'd heard variations of this speech before. Last year it was 12,000 for a sure thing at the track. The year before, 8,000 for poker debts. Each time Gary promised it would be the last. "No, son," I said firmly. "Not this time." His face went white, then red again. "What do you mean, not this time? I'm your son." "Which is exactly why I'm saying no." I turned my back on him deliberately. "Every dollar I give you disappears into some slot machine or poker game. I won't enable this anymore." "Enable?" The word exploded from his lips like a curse. "I'm asking my father for help, and you call it enabling. I call it what it is." I faced him, gripping the edge of the counter. "You're 38 years old, Gary. When are you going to stop running to me every time you make a mess of your life?" He stared at me for a long moment, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Then something cold crept into his expression, something I'd never seen before. "You'll regret this, old man," he whispered, menace in his voice that made my blood run cold. "You think you're so high and mighty, sitting on that farm money while your own son is in trouble. Maybe it's time someone showed you what real trouble looks like." Before I could respond, he turned and stormed toward the door. The screen door banged shut behind him, and through the window I watched him climb into his battered pickup truck. The engine roared to life and rattled the kitchen windows as his taillights disappeared down the gravel road. The sudden silence felt oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of insects and the creaks of the old house. All weekend I avoided the kitchen where the confrontation had taken place, keeping busy with yard work and small repairs. Yet every time I walked past that doorway, I could still hear Gary's voice. "You'll regret this, old man." Monday morning found me in my favorite armchair, nursing a cup of coffee that was growing cold on the side table. The old rotary phone began ringing, its shrill tone cutting through the quiet house like a blade. "Hello, Dad." Gary's voice sounded different, warmer, almost cheerful. The harsh edge from Friday night was gone. "Hey, I wanted to call and apologize for the other night. I was way out of line." I tightened my grip on the receiver. In 38 years, Gary had never called to apologize for anything without being prompted. "Really? This is unexpected," I said. I know. He laughed, but it sounded forced, like he was reading from a script. "I've been thinking about what you said, and you're absolutely right. I can't keep coming to you every time I mess up. It's not fair. Actually, that's why I'm calling. Heidi and I want to have you over for dinner Wednesday night. She's making that pot roast you like. We thought it might be nice to spend some time together as a family." I hesitated, considering the offer despite my better judgment. Maybe his wife's influence was finally starting to show. "Wednesday night," I repeated. "What time?" 6:30. We're at 142 Maple Street now. The blue house with the white shutters, across from the elementary school. He rattled off the address too smoothly, like he was reading from a piece of paper. "Heidi's really excited about having you over," he continued. "She keeps talking about how we need to be a real family again." That much was true. Heidi had always been the one to organize gatherings, usually over Gary's protests. "Well," I said slowly, staring at the napkin where I'd written the address. "I suppose I could come by." "Great, Dad. We'll see you Wednesday at 6:30. And Dad, thanks for giving me another chance. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful." The line went dead before I could respond. Something about the conversation felt rehearsed, but maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Maybe he was finally trying. Still, that night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Gary's cold, threatening face from Friday. The son I raised would never have looked at me that way. Tuesday morning, while sipping my coffee at the kitchen sink, I noticed an unfamiliar truck parked across from Mrs. Henderson's mailbox, positioned with a clear view of my driveway. Dew still clung to its windshield, suggesting it had been there overnight. Through the driver's side window, I saw a man hunched over the steering wheel, his fingers drumming nervously on the dashboard. I set my mug down and walked outside. The man, middle-aged with thinning hair, jumped when I knocked on his window. "Morning," I said evenly. "Everything okay? You've been parked here a while?" "Oh, yes, sir. Everything's fine," he said, voice pitched a little too high. "Just having some engine trouble. Waiting for it to cool down before I try starting her again." I glanced at the truck's Virginia plates. Odd for someone stranded in a quiet Pennsylvania neighborhood. "Engine trouble. I've got plenty of mechanical experience if you need a hand." No, that's kind of you, but I think it's more of an electrical issue. Or maybe the carburetor." He fumbled through the explanation, contradicting himself before the words were fully out. "I've got a buddy coming to take a look later." "Well, If you change your mind, I'm right across the street, I said, gesturing toward my house. Name's Wilbur Porter. There's a good mechanic shop about 2 miles down Route 15, if your friend can't make it. That's real generous of you, Mr. Porter. Real generous, he replied quickly, already reaching to roll the window up. Something about the interaction felt wrong. His explanation was too detailed for simple car trouble, and his nervousness far too intense. As I walked back toward my house, I looked over my shoulder one more time. The man had already rolled up the window and returned to drumming his fingers on the dashboard, occasionally glancing at my property with a calculating gaze. By noon, the truck was gone. Wednesday arrived with the kind of spring weather that made everything seem possible. I spent the day swinging between anticipation and unease, the memory of that strange truck lingering in the back of my mind. Gary's dinner invitation consumed my thoughts, and despite my doubts, I found myself hoping this might truly be the beginning of something better between us. At 5:30, I began preparing for the evening. I pulled my navy blue suit from the closet, slightly worn at the elbows, but still respectable. I polished my leather shoes until they shone, selected a conservative tie, and chose a bottle of Cabernet from the small wine collection in the basement. The mirror reflected a man trying his best for his son, and the sight both pleased and saddened me. How long had it been since Gary and I shared a meal without tension? How many years since he invited me anywhere without needing something in return? Stepping outside at 6 o'clock, I nearly collided with my neighbor Elmer Jenkins, who was watering the flower bed between our properties. His weathered face broke into a friendly smile as he greeted me. He noticed my formal attire and gave me a warm smile. "Well, don't you look sharp this evening, Wilbur? Special occasion." "Gary invited me to dinner," I replied, holding up the wine bottle with what I hoped was casual confidence. "First time in quite a while that we've done something like this." Elmer's expression softened with genuine warmth. "That's wonderful news. Family's the most important thing we've got, especially at our age. I'm glad to hear you two are working things out." "We'll see how it goes," I said, appreciating his optimism even if I couldn't fully share it. "You know how these things can be." "I do indeed," he replied, turning off his garden hose and leaning against the fence post. "But sometimes all it takes is someone extending a hand first." Sounds like Gary's trying to do that. The drive to Gary's neighborhood carried me through familiar riverside streets, across the narrow river the town was named for. I'd driven these roads countless times over the years, but tonight they felt different. Like I was heading towards something significant, rather than simply going from one place to another. Gary's new address led me into a part of town I rarely visited, where the homes were newer and the lawns more perfectly trimmed than in my older neighborhood. The quiet prosperity of the area surprised me, given Gary's recent financial troubles. How was he affording a place like this? Number 142 Maple Street was a tidy blue house with white shutters, just as Gary had described. The lawn was neatly cut, and warm light spilled from the windows, creating a picture of calm domestic happiness. I parked behind a silver sedan, likely Hades, and checked my reflection in the rearview mirror before stepping out. The wine bottle felt unexpectedly heavy in my hand as I walked up the front path. Through the wide picture window, I caught glimpses of movement inside, figures bustling in preparation. The porch light flicked on as I approached, and I realized Gary must have been watching for me. Taking a steadying breath, I pressed the doorbell. This was it. The moment I'd learn whether my son's invitation was sincere or just another performance in a long history of disappointments. Quick, eager footsteps approached. The door swung open before the chime had finished. Gary's smile stretched wide, almost painfully so, his enthusiasm putting me on immediate alert. Before I could even step fully onto the porch, he pulled the door open and reached for my hand with both of his. "Dad, you made it. Right on time. Just like always." His voice carried the same unnaturally cheerful tone he'd used during Monday's phone call, pitched slightly higher than usual. "Come in, come in." Heidi's been cooking all afternoon." Heidi appeared beside him almost instantly, as though she'd been waiting just inside. Her hands fluttered nervously as she accepted the wine bottle, trembling slightly as she clutched it to her chest like a shield. "Mr. Porter, it's so good to see you. This is such a beautiful wine. You really didn't need to bring anything, but it's so thoughtful." The words poured out in a breathless rush. Inside, the house felt almost unnaturally prepared. Every surface gleamed as though freshly polished, a mix of furniture wax and cooking aromas lingering in the air. Fresh roses stood in a crystal vase on the coffee table, an elegant touch that felt out of place in Gary's typically laid-back lifestyle. "Let me take your jacket, Dad," Gary said, already behind me and helping me out of my coat with a level of attentiveness I'd never experienced from him before. "You look great. Really sharp. That tie brings out your eyes." The dining room looked like a scene from a magazine spread. China plates I'd never seen before were set with perfect precision. Silverware glinting under the warm candlelight scattered across the table. It was beautiful, but it felt more like a carefully arranged stage than a casual family dinner. "Gary tells me you haven't seen the house since we moved in," Heidi said, guiding me toward the dining area. "We've done so much with it. Gary's been incredibly handy with all the improvements," Heidi said as she led me toward the dining room. I followed her, noticing how carefully she avoided meeting my eyes. Her movements were quick and efficient, but there was a subtle tension in the way she held her shoulders, as if bracing for something. The meal itself was undeniably impressive. Perfectly cooked steak, creamy mashed potatoes, and crisp green beans, all served on china I didn't recognize. Gary made a show of opening my wine with a polished corkscrew that looked like it had been purchased just for the evening. "A toast," Gary announced, raising his glass with theatrical enthusiasm. "To second chances, to family, to leaving the past behind and moving forward together." The wine was excellent, but I found myself watching my son more than tasting it. His eyes flicked toward his watch again and again. Quick, furtive glances he probably thought I wouldn't notice. Each time, his smile tightened slightly at the corners. "Tell me about your work, Gary," I said, cutting into the perfectly cooked steak. "Things going better for you lately?" "Much better, Dad." "Much better," he replied quickly, launching into a vague explanation of consulting opportunities and new projects. The words sounded rehearsed, lacking any real details. "I've really turned things around. Heidi can tell you. I'm a different man now." Heidi nodded with exaggerated enthusiasm, but her smile looked thin. "He's been working so hard, really dedicated to making positive changes." All through the conversation, her hands stayed busy, serving more food, refilling glasses, straightening napkins that didn't need adjusting. The dinner talk felt carefully managed, with both Gary and Heidi steering away from anything remotely uncomfortable. When I asked about their finances or Gary's actual employment, their answers grew vague, full of quick subject changes and half-finished sentences. Remember when you taught me to change the oil in that old Bic? Gary said suddenly, his laugh a little too loud. I must have spilled more oil on the garage floor than in the engine. The memory was pleasant, but the way he introduced it felt scripted, like he'd prepared a list of safe childhood stories to share whenever conversation threatened to drift toward recent troubles. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching a performance rather than enjoying a real family dinner. As we finished the main course, my phone rang, its sharp tone cutting through Gary's story about some new business opportunity. Both Gary and Heidi froze for a fraction of a second before Gary forced a casual smile. Go ahead and answer it, Dad. Don't mind us. I reached for my phone, feeling the vibration in my pocket. Caller ID showed Elmer Jenkins, my neighbor. A small warmth spread through me at the sight of his name. Elmer, what's going on? I asked, stepping slightly away from the table as Gary and Heidi watched me too carefully. Wilbur, I hope I'm not interrupting, Elmer said, his gravelly voice tinged with concern. I was just wondering, are you home tonight? I thought I saw your car earlier, but now I'm not so sure. No, I'm at Gary's for dinner. My words felt strangely heavy. There was a pause before Elmer spoke again, his voice lower now, edged with alarm. Wilbur, there are lights moving around inside your house. Not normal lights. Flashlights, like someone searching through the rooms. I've been watching for about 10 minutes now. The fork slipped from Gary's fingers, clattering loudly against his plate. Heidi's face drained of color, her hands tightening around the wine bottle. What do you mean, lights moving around? I asked, my voice sounding distant even to myself. I'm sure of it, Elmer said firmly. I was checking my mailbox when I noticed. First in your living room, then the kitchen, now upstairs. Whoever it is, they're moving with purpose. Should I call the police? The room seemed to tilt slightly as my free hand instinctively reached for my car keys. Yes, call the police, I said quickly. I'm heading home right now. Be careful, Elmer warned. I'll keep watch from my window until you get there. I ended the call and looked up to find Gary and Heidi staring at me, their expressions stiff and unnatural. Someone's in my house, I said, already reaching for my jacket. Gary's response came too fast, his laugh too loud for the tense silence. Oh,
Come on, Dad.
old Elmer probably just saw tree shadows. You know how he gets. Still thinks he's on guard duty from his army days. The dismissiveness in his voice hit me wrong, especially so soon after Elmer's worried call. I paused, studying Gary's face in the flickering candlelight. His smile looked strained, his eyes bright with something close to panic. Elmer isn't confused, I said firmly. He knows the difference between shadows and flashlights moving through a house. Someone is inside. Gary's chair scraped sharply against the floor as he jumped to his feet, nearly toppling it. His sudden movement to block my path was clumsy but desperate. Wah, hold on there, Dad. You're getting worked up over nothing, he said, his laugh ringing false and slightly hysterical. Elmer's 70. He probably can't see his own hand in front of his face at night. I stopped, not because his words made sense, but because his tone carried the same frantic energy I remembered from his childhood. The same overeager explanations he used to give when he'd broken a window or stolen a cookie. Gary, I said quietly but firmly, move aside. Elmer's eyesight is fine, and he wouldn't call unless he was certain. Someone is in my house. Gary repositioned himself more squarely between me and the door, his hands settling on my shoulders in a way that felt more restraining than comforting. Think about it logically, he said, forcing a calmness that didn't match the tension in his grip. If someone really was breaking into houses, wouldn't they choose a time when people weren't eating dinner? Wouldn't they check to make sure nobody was home first? His words landed strangely, too specific, too informed for someone supposedly trying to reassure a worried father. I looked up at my son and saw something I'd never seen before, a cold calculation behind his eyes. The look of someone who knew exactly what was happening and was desperate to keep me from finding out. How do you know they didn't check first? The question escaped before I could stop it. Gary's expression flickered with something that looked uncomfortably like fear. I don't, he said quickly. It's just, that's what criminals do, right? They plan things out. His grip tightened, and I realized he was no longer just steadying me. He was physically preventing me from moving forward. Dad, please. Let's just finish dinner, and then we'll go together. I'll come with you to check everything out. Behind him, Heidi stood frozen, a dish towel clenched in her white, knuckled hands. When our eyes met, she looked away, but not before I caught the unmistakable flash of guilt on her face. Step aside, son. The words came out harder than I intended, carrying the weight of decades of parental authority. I'm going to check on my house. Now. Dad, you're being unreasonable. Think about this rationally. Rationally. I stepped closer, close enough to see beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool evening air. Rationally would be trusting my neighbor's word over the protests of a son who's lied to me more times than I can count. Gary's face flushed red. For a heartbeat, I thought he might actually strike me. Instead, he shifted fully into my path, using his size to block the doorway. You're not leaving until we talk this through, he said, his voice dropping to a cold, threatening register I'd never heard from him before. Gary William Porter, I said, using his full name like I had when he was a boy and had crossed a line. You will move aside and let me leave this house right now. Or what? You'll call the cops on your own son. His breath smelled of wine, his eyes bright with something like panic. You're going to destroy this family over some old man's paranoid fantasies. But as he spoke, his eyes darted toward the front door, then to his watch, then back to Heidi. The pattern was too deliberate to be random. He was keeping track of time, counting down to something that required me to stay right where I was. It's not paranoia if someone is actually in my house, I said evenly. And if you don't let me pass, I'm going to start wondering why my own son is so determined to keep me away from home on the exact night someone decides to rob it. The accusation hung in the air like a poisonous fog. Gary's face shifted through a series of micro-expressions. Shock, guilt, anger, before settling into a desperate resignation. Without a word, he reached for the deadbolt and turned it with a sharp metallic click that echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. Slowly, deliberately, he slipped the key into his pocket and stared at me. You're not leaving, Dad, he said quietly. Not until we figure this out. The simple statement carried more menace than any threat he could have made. I stared at my son, this stranger wearing Gary's face, and felt something cold settle in my chest. Unlock that door right now, I said, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. I can't do that. He leaned against the door, arms crossed, no longer pretending to be concerned. Not until you calm down and listen to reason. Behind him, Heidi pressed herself against the dining room wall, still clutching the dish towel like a lifeline. Her eyes were wide with the kind of horror that comes from watching someone you thought you knew transform into someone unrecognizable. Reason. I forced my voice to remain calm. You just locked me in your house while someone robs mine. What possible reason could justify that? You don't understand the situation, Gary said, his tone carrying a warning that chilled me. There are people involved in this that you don't want to cross. People who don't forgive debts. The admission hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just that Gary had planned something. It was that he was willing to sacrifice his own father to solve problems of his own making. Suddenly, the demand for $25,000, the cold look in his eyes when I'd refused, and his promise that I'd regret my decision all made perfect, horrifying sense. I need to use the bathroom, I said quietly. Gary hesitated, suspicion flickering across his face, but some shred of decency, or perhaps habit, kept him from refusing. Fine, he said, but don't try anything stupid. The bathroom was at the back of the house, with a small window that opened to the backyard. I closed the door and listened to Gary and Hades' frantic whispers in the hallway. The latch on the window was old but loose. It opened with surprising ease, and the screen came away with only a faint squeal of metal. The drop to the flower bed below was about 6 feet. Uncomfortable for a 68-year-old man, but manageable. Adrenaline gave me the strength I needed. I landed hard, dirt and twigs clinging to my clothes, but nothing broke. Behind me, Gary's voice rose in alarm. How long before he realized I was gone? My car sat waiting in the driveway, keys in my pocket. The engine turned over smoothly, and I eased down the street with deliberate care, not wanting to draw attention. Only when I was several blocks away did I allow myself to breathe, and to fully grasp what had just happened. My own son had betrayed me, not just lied, not just manipulated, but actively plotted a crime against me while pretending to seek reconciliation. The dinner, the apologies, Hades' nervousness. All of it had been an elaborate performance to keep me away, while my house was being robbed. The drive back to my neighborhood blurred past in a haze of fury and grief. But beneath the anger and heartbreak was something colder. A grim resolve Gary had inherited from me along with my eyes and stubborn streak. He'd underestimated what his old man was capable of when pushed too far. When I turned onto my street, flashing red and blue lights painted the houses in eerie colors. Police cars clustered in front of my home. Neighbors stood on their porches, murmuring behind cupped hands. I parked quickly and hurried toward Officer Ted Miller, who was directing the scene with calm efficiency. "Mr. Porter," he said as I approached, "we've got your burglar in custody. Your neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, has been very helpful." Relief and dread warred inside me. Someone really was in my house. Yes. "We caught the suspect in your basement, trying to access a safe. He's confessed to the break-in, and he shared some information I think you'll find disturbing." He guided me to the back of a patrol car, where a thin, pale man sat in handcuffs, head bowed. I recognized him instantly. The nervous stranger who'd claimed to have truck trouble outside Mrs. Henderson's mailbox the day before. "His name is Otis Raines," Officer Miller said. "Does that ring a bell?" "I spoke to him yesterday," I said numbly. "He seemed harmless." Claimed he was stranded. According to Mr. Raines, he was hired to commit this burglary. And he's been very forthcoming, hoping for a lighter sentence. Miller's voice dropped slightly. "Mr. Porter, he says your son arranged this entire thing." The words hit harder than a punch, even though I'd suspected it from the moment Gary blocked my path. Hearing it confirmed made it real. Gary hired him, I said flatly. That's what he claims, Miller replied. Offered him $5,000 to break into your safe and take 25. Your dinner invitation tonight was planned to keep you away while the job was done. We inspected the basement. My old Mosler safe, installed by my father decades ago, stood firm despite fresh tool marks. The burglar had failed to crack it before the police arrived. Back outside, Elmer approached, pride and relief shining in his eyes. I told you something was off with that truck, he said, shaking my hand. Been keeping an eye on that fellow since Tuesday morning. You saved my life savings. Elmer, I said quietly. If you hadn't called when you did, any neighbor would have done the same, he said, though his modest smile betrayed a well-earned satisfaction. Officer Miller rejoined us. Mr. Porter, we're heading to your son's house now to place him under arrest. Given the suspect's confession and the evidence, we're ready to charge Gary Porter with conspiracy to commit burglary and related crimes. Do you wish to press full charges? I looked back at my house, then toward the man who'd protected it. My voice was steady. Yes, I want full charges pressed. The police convoy rolled through the quiet streets toward Gary's home. Lights blazed in every window when we arrived, as if he were trying to hold back the night itself. Through the large picture window, I could see Gary pacing like a caged animal while Heidi moved hurriedly with suitcases in her hands. Before Officer Miller could knock, Heidi opened the door. Her face was pale and drawn, her eyes red from crying. Behind her, Gary appeared, his earlier confidence gone, replaced by a frantic desperation. Gary Porter, Miller said evenly, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit burglary and solicitation of criminal activity. This is ridiculous, Gary shouted as the cuffs clicked shut. You're destroying a family over some paranoid fantasy. But Heidi stepped back, her voice trembling but clear. I know you locked your father in this house. I know you hired someone to rob him because he wouldn't give you money for your gambling debts. I won't lie for you. Gary's protests grew frantic, but the officers remained unmoved. They guided him toward the patrol car as he struggled, still trying to talk his way out of the inevitable. 2 days later, I sat on my porch with Elmer, sharing a quiet beer as the neighborhood returned to its peaceful rhythm. Court called this morning, I told him. Gary got 5 years probation, full restitution, and 500 hours of community service. Judge said the fact that it was family made it worse, not better. Elmer nodded. Sounds about right. What about the burglar? 2 years in county jail. Repeat offender. We sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the familiar weekend bustle. Kids on bicycles, neighbors tending gardens, the soft glow of porch lights as evening settled. I almost feel sorry for Gary, I said finally. Almost. Almost counts, Elmer replied, setting down his beer. Shows you're still his father, even after everything. I thought about the dinner, about the way Gary and Heidi had acted like performers in a carefully rehearsed play. My parental instincts had told me something was wrong, but I'd wanted so badly to believe my son had changed that I ignored the signs. Won't make that mistake again, I said quietly. Doesn't mean you stop hoping, Elmer said. Just means you hope with your eyes open. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, painting the street in golden light, I realized what Gary had truly tried to steal, not just my savings, but the sense of safety and trust that made this neighborhood feel like home. Thanks to Elmer, and a lifetime of lessons learned the hard way, he hadn't succeeded. Thank you, I said to Elmer, the words carrying more weight than casual gratitude. For watching out for me. For trusting your instincts. For being the kind of neighbor everyone hopes to have. Elmer smiled, pride softening into genuine affection. That's what neighbors do, Wilbur. We look out for each other. The street grew quiet as the last light faded, leaving only the comforting knowledge that justice had been served, trust, though scarred, could be rebuilt, and real community still existed where people earned it honestly.